Hello and welcome to the 1% Better Project. Today I'm fired up to learn. My guest today, Jeffrey Swarr. Jeff, thanks for joining me, man.
Joe, thanks for having me.
What is your job title when you describe it to people?
So job title that I wear a couple different hats. So professionally, I'm a special education teacher, and then kind of what I do individually, working with some teams, is really call it performance enhancement coach. Is just working with some teams and individuals to help them perform at their best.
Oh, I love it. And I think we're going to cross paths on a few things. I got a chance to get your book, and it's unbelievable. So a lot of what I'll talk about is found in your book, A Competitor's Heart. Unbelievable cover, by the way.
I give a shout out to Daniel Yeager on that. Did a great job with it. It's actually a combination of about 3 covers that he presented as options.
Is that right?
And worked together, and he did a great job on it.
As an English teacher, biggest lie we tell our students is not to judge a book by its cover. This is a solid cover. Competitor's Heart, 369 Days of Development. It's what attracted me to your work, but I think that there seem to be some commonalities as we spoke leading up to our talk. You seem to be following the work of the 1% Better Project, and it actually cross-sectioned a lot with some of the things you spoke about in the book.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, when I kind of had the idea of writing this book, it was about what we do on a daily basis. And having kind of crossed paths with some of the 1% Better stuff is like, really, what are we doing on that daily basis to make that one little movement better, that one little percent better? And that was the focus of kind of how the book's been set up.
Great. Yeah, and it definitely aligns with my mission. Where can people find you on social media? I find during a lot of conversations, I wait till the end, and then people want to look you up in the beginning. So where can people find you?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. That is the 2 letters MR for Mr. MR, and then an underscore Swarr, SWARR. And there's a tweet every day at 6 a.m. that goes out. There might be some others that follow that, but they're set every day at 6 a.m., kind of a thought or a quote of the day. I would say, to use the 1% Better, 1% of the time they're other people's quotes, and 99% of the time they're my quotes.
Yeah, and actually the book's set up that way. I mean, I would say this, and a ringing endorsement of this book. If you got nothing else out of this book than just using it as the ultimate quote book, I think it pays for itself. But then where it kind of differentiates, Jeff, what I liked was you almost got to write a Seth Godin-esque, if you will, blog post style, short response to each quote. That's how I took it. Does that seem like a fair assessment of how you wrote the book?
Yeah, I mean, so why don't I just kind of like break down how I went about writing it?
Yeah, I love it.
I really think it links to the 1% Better focus. So I take great pride in doing some type of reading every single day. Kind of within my routine is 15 minutes. So typically what I have is some kind of daily reader that spans an entire year. And I've read a number of different daily readers. And then it's kind of like, okay, looked at putting my own together, but from the teaching standpoint, it was like, okay, I don't just want to say like a thought for the day. So I'll dive into why it's 369 days, because that's usually something people ask about, because it's not 365 for a year. It's not 366 for a leap year. It's 369. So basically there's 41 terms that are outlined in the book, 9 days on each term. So it goes back to the baseball concept setup, is that there's 9 innings in a game, so 9 days on each one of these 41 terms. So basically what I did was go and with all the reading that I've done and, just then would quite simply look some up, take quotes that applied to the 41 terms that I had outlined, and would basically start off with the quote at the beginning. And then what I always describe is like 2 to 3 to 4 paragraphs, my thoughts on that quote or some theme that we're developing within that, and then a question of the day that goes with that. And I always say that's the teacher in me, is that question of the day, to pull out some type of like reflection on the reader's end.
I love that. 5 minutes in, you said a term, the daily reader, and I gotta be honest, I don't know exactly what you mean by that. I have an idea, but that seems like something that people can use right away. Explain that a little bit, please.
Well, I mean, I'll give some shout outs to some other people. So, like John Maxwell, he has a daily reader. You basically sit down, you read one page a day. Brian Cain's got the Daily Dominator. You sit down, you read one page a day on that. Right now, the daily reader that I'm reading is the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And it's very, I look at these as very simple. And what I mean by that is I'm not committing to reading like a chapter a day. I sit down and typically I'm reading one page a day. So that was, my goal. I kind of joke now when I go to some teams that it kind of looks like a college textbook. It was not my goal. But I say to them, hopefully you're going to open this more than your college textbook. Because if you've taken any college textbooks, sometimes you don't open them real that often. But you can come to this on a daily basis then.
I love it, and that does mesh with their philosophy totally. I want to ask you about reading. You've heard Warren Buffett probably say that he doesn't know a single world-class person that doesn't read a ton. But yet, as the days get busier for people, you must run into adults, teenagers, athletes that just claim that they don't like reading. How would you and how do you address that?
Well, I think one of the things that I look at it, teaching in a high school situation, I mean, we set kids up to not necessarily make a choice on what they read. They're kind of given a reading list, and this is what we're going to read for this particular course. And so right away, when you take away the choice, then they're like, okay, well, I'm kind of forced to do this. So they don't necessarily get the joy out of it right away. I know for me personally, growing up, I really didn't want to read anything that was given to me in school, but I'd read the sports page to no end. So it was, I think, given the choice, they don't necessarily connect with that at first. So that, quite honestly, is one of the reasons I wrote the book in the way that I did is because, hey, can you sit down and commit to just giving me 5 minutes a day? Okay, when you read this page, it's going to take you about 5 minutes. We're going to do this little by little, and we'll continue. We'll build through. And I think that's just a huge piece. But the bottom line is, if you're going to be a leader, you got to be a reader, okay, and vice versa. So you've got to be able to commit to grow and read. Now, that might not be sitting down reading a book, but it might be consistently reading a blog that links to some of the concepts that you have, or, in this case, listening to a podcast. But the bottom line is readers, learners, they're leaders.
Great point. And I think that when people ask me as a teacher, how do you get started? How do you find good stuff? I can tell you right now that if they were to pick up your book and then follow the path to the people whose quotes you use, that would be an unbelievable reading list in and of itself.
Well, I think, that's piece of it. You look, and I'd like to think that I pull quotes from all over the place. There might be some leadership people. There might be some famous historical figures. There might be some people that you never even heard of, kind of in the book as well, like quote-wise. And the bottom line is, when you pull quotes that have stood the test of time, that have been around a long time, there's definite value in those.
This is why I wanted to have Jeff on the show, just able to bounce around with some topics that I love, and I feel like I'm going to get an education today, so thanks in advance for that, Jeff.
We try, just trying to get 1% better.
I love it. Let's jump into some of the book habits you start out with right away, and something I really gravitated towards, morning routine, list everything you did prior to leaving the house, and evening routine, list everything you did after 5 p.m. I really am attracted to something that simple, because it's doable, it's manageable, it's measurable. What kind of feedback do you get on a section like that as you hand this out to the likes of Columbia baseball, high school teams all over the country?
Well, I think the feedback that we've gotten is just kind of like what you just said, very simple. And the way I describe this when we talk about it also as well is that we got bookend routines. And there's a lot of things that are dictated to us, but the two things that we definitely own are when we get up in the morning and before we go to bed. So, if you take hold of those routines in the morning, you set your day up for success. If you take hold of that routine in the evening, you've set your dreams up for success. And so you kind of have that cycle that continues, and it's things that you own. So again, whether you're talking about an adolescent in a high school, their day's dictated to them, okay? But when they get up in the morning and when they go to bed at night, they own those, all right? You go to a college and you go to Columbia baseball team, they own the morning, they own the night. Their coach might just tell them what time they need to be there. They might have schedules that are dictated to them class-wise during the day, but they own those two pieces there. And again, beginning of the day, set your day up for success. End of the day, set your dreams up for success, and you continually build on those.
Love it. That's early in the book. And then I'm jumping around. I go all the way to page 267 and I see pride. Can you talk a little bit about pride in the specific? Because that seems to me always one of those words that you kind of think you know what it means. And then I always struggle to define it. But you do an unbelievable job in the book doing so.
Well, I think one of the things we just look at a little differently, and this is, it ties into my faith aspect, is while I looked at some of these aspects of reading, one of the goals I had was just to read through the Bible. It took me about 2 years to do it because, again, you kind of look at the 1% standpoint. I basically read 2 chapters a day. And it kind of also relates to the title of the book. If I can I'll jump to the title and then come back to the pride aspect. So the title of the book is A Competitor's Heart, and there's 2 pieces of that, the aspect of competitor and the aspect of heart. Well, the piece of heart is when I was reading through the Bible, it just kind of was alarming to me. Not alarming in a bad way, but alarming in I didn't necessarily realize all the time how many times the word heart was used in the Bible. Well, outside of any reference to a deity, Lord, God, Father, Jesus Christ, the next most used word is heart. And in the original translation, the Hebrew word lebab, and I probably butchered the pronunciation on that, really just means the mental, spiritual, and emotional center of what we do. It doesn't mean the physical function of the heart as we identify it with athletes. So that came up a lot, and it was living and competing from the heart is what stuck with me. And then that brings it to kind of the word pride. If you look up pride in the Bible, it really talks about that as a sin. And that to me is the boastful pride, the one that says, look at what I've done. And, in this day and age of society, there's a lot of people that are out there and that are saying, hey, look at what I've done. And it's really tough for me, having written the book, to be like, hey, look at this book that I've written. Because that to me is, if you want to use a biblical nature, a sinful pride, but it's a boastful pride that really doesn't get you anywhere. But really it's the good pride that is the dignity and self-respect that John Maxwell talks about, but it's not an arrogance. And it's good to have a pride that says, okay, you know what? I'm proud of the fact that I've done this research and, quite frankly, worked over 2 years to write this book and put it together. Because, again, with the 1% better, I think it links a lot to your message, Joe, is that basically what I did was I would sit down and I would write about 2 pages a day. And the entire process took about 1.5 years to 2 years to get from idea to hard copy in hand. And so we come back to that pride in that it's not this conceit or arrogance. It's the continual work and saying, you know what, I'm proud of the things that I've accomplished. I'm proud at what we've done, but you can also have a humility, a humbleness that comes with that.
Yeah, and alongside that, I see just something simple like personal responsibility and daily excellence. Now, I have to admit I'd never heard that, but it makes all the sense in the world. When I read that, though, I think attention to detail. Is that a piece of it for you?
I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we don't say that we got to pay attention to detail. It's the little things add up to the big sum. Now, we might have, and I'm going to tell you, we have these big picture goals, but the way we get there are putting those little things in place, and I come back to the habits and routines are little things that we can do.
So how do you balance that with don't sweat the small stuff in terms of that national message?
It's all small stuff when it comes down to it. I think that people we link to the small stuff are being how it impacts us, how something as small in our lives stressing us, impacting us. But what I look at is, we can start small. And one of the other pieces in the book is kind of the Japanese, the Kaizen way. And it's that small little progression. And the Kaizen way, I always joke about this, is they want people to begin to floss. They say, hey, you know what? For a couple of weeks, why don't you floss one tooth?
One tooth, yeah.
I think that would take a long time for me. I don't know that many Americans could say, okay, you know what? For a couple of weeks, I'm going to floss one tooth. But to just work at these little things, and that comes back to what the book is about, is you doing one little thing each day.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just recently heard Gretchen Rubin talk about that flossing idea, and she said that her take on it was, depending on what kind of person you are, there are people out there that do like to have huge, impactful, moves at the beginning of a habit change. I'd never heard it quite that way, but she kind of seemed to think it was more individualized. Some people do like those small process things, and some people like a bigger change at first.
It's probably the coach in me. We always want to talk about the process and continuing to stick with the process that's going to get you to the result. What I actually use a lot when I work with some teams is the piece of, success is made of little things that are easy to do, but because they're so easy to do, they're also easy not to do.
Yeah,
and I use the flossing example a lot. It takes very little time to do it, but it's also easy not to do because, less than 50% of America does it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. You led me in with the coaching to a word that appears on 114 pages in your book. A little quick Google search on Control F actually is the 1% better trick there. But competition. One of the things I get to do on this project is kind of get thoughtful people in front of me like you and ask them a question that I'm genuinely battling with. And what I'm battling with on some level is the word competition. Because on one level, it's in a lot of your biomaterials, and you're talking about competing every day. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing process from everyone else. And I really am at a place in my career, professionally, coaching-wise, where I'm struggling to find that proper balance between everything's a competition to just taking pride in the little things. What's the relationship? Can you tease out the relationship a little bit there?
All right. So I'm going to tease that out by putting you on the spot and asking you a question.
All right.
Do you know what the Latin root of the word compete is?
Wow. I do know a few Latin words, but my high school teachers would be rolling over right now. I do not.
I didn't take Latin in high school at all either, so I know very little Latin, maybe like tabula rasa, blank slate, and I know the Latin root of the word compete is compatire, C-O-M space P-E-T-I-R-E.
Okay.
And that means to seek with. Okay, so a lot of people view competition as this me against you, team against team. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't address and say, okay, when we do show up for a competition, that there's going to be a winner and loser on the scoreboard. Okay, I'd be remiss in that fact. However, the true root of competition is really to seek with, and if we compete with ourselves, that's all we control. Okay, if we compete with ourselves while we're in that game, in that competition, that's all that we control. Yes, are we looking for that outcome that has that win on the scoreboard? You're darn right we are. You're not going to meet anyone that's less competitive than me. All right? But when we take hold of that competition and what we control, it frees us to perform at our best. And so that is the root of competition for me. And just looking at that and saying, okay, if we're going to develop the competitor's heart, the one that competes regardless of the situation, regardless of the score, we've got to have that view of competition. And, that's something that I just firmly believe in. I would say it's been a philosophical shift for me because the other piece of it is when I focused on the competition of competing against someone, inevitably I performed at a lower level and inevitably we ended up losing. And so that's been a huge paradigm shift for me. When we look at what do we control, what can we compete with and get better at, it leads us to the point where, we end up winning more. So again, I'd be remiss in the fact and say, okay, well, we're just out here holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and do the best we can. That's the furthest thing from the truth.
But then have you had situations with programs you've worked with who have had de facto losing seasons but have felt tremendous about it because of what they've achieved competition-wise?
Well, here's something. I'm gonna state a dangerous fact, okay? In that, so there were, I believe it was five teams that I worked with this past spring, so the spring of 2016. Every single one of those programs played in the postseason in some way, shape, or form. From the Millersville baseball team that was Division II national runner-up to local high school teams, one of which was the high school that I teach with. Their softball team made the furthest they've ever made. They were state runners-up in their class in Pennsylvania. to another local high school with the best record that they've ever had in a regular season. So, I mean, I haven't had those situations where they have, quote unquote, failed miserably from a wins and losses standpoint. But they come back and they compete under with which they control, and inevitably they end up performing at a higher level and being pretty successful. So I'm not trying to dodge your question. In the fall, there was a soccer team that they didn't make the postseason, but they continued to develop and they progressed and they lived within the tribe aspect that we had kind of worked with on them.
Well, what I heard there was if you're a team that had a losing record last year, you need to contact Jeff to see if he can widen his resume a little bit and see if we can see what he can do for a team that didn't win. I like that, Jeff. I want to ask you about permission. I don't know if it's in the book, but you're doing something that's pretty cool, and people listening probably think that they would like to try it as well. You're consulting with teams. You're in the classroom. You're writing. You're doing a lot. Where did you come up with the permission slip, so to speak, to kind of pursue that dream?
I honestly, Joe, it's right in the beginning of the book. It's my mess into my message. So, it kind of dovetails into what we just talked about. So I was on the road of coaching and wanting to be a full-time baseball coach at the collegiate level. I was an assistant at Franklin and Marshall for 3 years and had the opportunity to be the head baseball coach at Millersville University here in Pennsylvania in 2006. And when I took that position, they were actually not coming off, being put on NCAA probation the day that I was hired. And I had an awareness of that was going to happen. Well, I was regardless, I was going to work hard and I was going to bust the doors down and we were going to turn it around no matter what. And after about 18 months of burning the candle at both ends, you can use the term burned out. But quite frankly, I was focused on that result. I was like, all right, we're going to do whatever it is to get there. And I'm like, okay, we're going to win the lottery of competition, so to speak, and we're going to win. Without paying attention to what we needed to do in the small aspects. And that's what, again, I use the term, I don't necessarily like it, but I use the term burned me out. But mainly my focus was in the wrong area. So, walking away with my tail between my legs and saying, that was a failure and a mess, it kind of turned into my message. It gave me an opportunity to step back, step away from coaching, and really do some evaluation. And what turned me around then was the opportunity to coach at the high school that I teach at. When my best friend was the head baseball coach there, we always would bounce ideas off of each other, and I had the opportunity to coach with him. And it put us both in great spots because we both have some very, very similar mindsets, and we were able to kind of implement this with the teams that we've had there and having some pretty good success. But really, we talked about just getting better all the time and led us to state runner-up in 2012. But that's where it was like, okay, I put these things together, and then kind of, quite frankly, stepping back from that position because my best friend at that point, his girls were coming to high school and they played softball, and there's no way he could do both. So when we got finished with the state championship game in 2012, he stepped back and I won't say retired, but resigned. And at that point, I kind of started to step back as well and get into this aspect of it where it's like, okay, now I put a lot of these things together. You got the book that you've got in front of you. And, quite frankly, rather than having a team that, we had 30, 40 players within our program, now in the year of 2016, over 2,500 athletes that I had a chance to work with through various camps, teams, and individual work. And I just feel like it's that there's the permission slip, so to speak, and that now that message is being spread even further.
Powerful stuff. Tough question for you. I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. You talk about humility in the book. Was there any difficulty for you as you saw Millersville now take such exponential success after you left? I've left some coaching jobs that have also gone on to some success, and I struggled with it at times.
Time heals a lot of wounds, so to speak. And if you'd asked me 2 or 3 years after that experience, I would have said most definitely. But I firmly believe, and it comes back to my faith aspect, I firmly believe that I was put in that position to provide some discipline, because I can tell you coming into that position, there was no discipline within the program, and take some of those lumps, so to speak. And I really feel like that was my calling. Having taken what I've kind of referenced before, the mess into the message.
Got to respect it there. Thanks. You mentioned something else that I want to ask you about is I saw your TED Talk, which I was very impressed by, lengthening the gap. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that? And then I'm going to ask you a few follow-ups.
Okay, so basically, I'll give it a little plug here. If you can go to my website at Jeffrey Swarr, JeffreySwarr.com, and the link to it is on the left-hand side. But the title of it is a hashtag the gap. And there's a reason I use the hashtag. And the bottom line is all of us, but even more so our kids, are being raised in an age and a society where responses are expected to be immediate. Whether that be I do something and I expect to gain something from it right away. So from an athlete standpoint, I'm going to do this drill and I'm going to improve at it immediately. And the bottom line is that expectation of immediacy has turned into, when something happens in our lives, a stimulus, there's a response. And original Pavlov dog research, in that there was a stimulus and the response. And the bottom line is, between that stimulus and response, there's a gap. Now, that gap nowadays is microscopic, to the point where, I have an iPhone, and within the time that I've had an iPhone, they've programmed in the 3 dots that pop up in iMessage when someone is responding.
I love those 3 dots.
So that you've got... Yeah, well, what happens when they go away and you don't get a response?
Frustrated.
You start thinking about what happens, especially if I have texted my wife and I see those 3 dots come up and then I don't get a response immediately. I'm like, okay, what did I do to frustrate her, upset her? What has happened there? And so the bottom line is, there's a gap between the stimulus and response, and that really we need to lengthen that gap. That we need to be able to put some time and space between that. Because if there's no time and space, it's not a stimulus and response, it's a stimulus and a reaction. Okay, and we see that with poor social media posts when people respond when really it's a reaction. And so I really think our job is to put a little space and time in there and lengthening that gap. And that's why I put a little play on that, in that how we respond social media-wise, and that's why I use hashtag the gap as the title of the TED Talk.
Do you take issue with a quick response on text in general?
No. I mean, I do that. Actually, the TED Talk was shown in one of the classes at school yesterday. We have a mass media class that talks about a lot of the different ways we send and receive messages. And they showed the TED Talk in there. And I said, you're crazy to think that I don't have my phone in my pocket when I'm walking around. All right. But the bottom line is to train yourself that when that notification comes up, that you don't have to immediately respond. You're not a dog, in that you have to have that immediate response. Okay, yes, there's times that we do, but we look at it and we say, okay, let's add some space and time in there, and so that I can give a 21st century word that's actually been around a long time, a mindful response within that, rather than a mindless, I've just given it and I just respond.
What do the students' faces look like when they see their teacher on a TED Talk?
It's kind of brings in a little bit of the trying to be the pride and humility on my end. When it was first finished, I did show it in class a couple times. I don't show it in my class anymore. I let other teachers do that. I think, honestly, it's kind of interesting with the generation that I teach right now. That's like an immediate respect getter.
Yeah, no doubt.
Whereas when I had the opportunity to give a TED Talk to tell my parents I was giving a TED Talk, they had no idea what that was.
It's interesting, right? It's interesting dealing with parents with the new age of communication. They have a hard time, it seems, sussing out what's impressive, what's not.
Yeah, definitely. But, you kind of, and when I go to a talk to a camp and they have no idea who I am coming in, I kind of reference that I've given a TED Talk, and you can kind of see a little bit of connection, and people will go look it up potentially. So it's again, really interesting from a generational standpoint. It brings an immediate respect factor from them.
And I would imagine from your principal and staff like that as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not going out and reminding them that I've done that, but they know that it's there.
Talking with Jeff Swarr, performance enhancement coach. Jeff, 24, page 24 drew my attention. It's still in habits, but we're talking about a mantra. One of my favorite recent books is Eric Greitens' Resilience, and in it he talks about when times get tough, it's a mantra, not a manifesto that'll kind of win the day. You have a quick idea here on how to write a mantra. I have never seen one that looks this direct. I wonder if you can maybe on air a little bit tease this out with me.
Well, I mean, for me, I'll tell you this. I've got a couple mantras, and one of them is you have no control over what goes on around you, but you have total control over how you respond. And I'm blessed to have two sons. I've got an 8-year-old Simon, and I've got a 4-year-old Spencer, and I think my wife and I are doing the best we can to raise them. But the bottom line is we don't control what they do. So when they do something that frustrates me or I feel like I need to lash out at them, and just remind myself, you have no control over what goes around you, but you have total control over how you respond to them. So that's definitely a mantra that I use. Well, you got to be able to reward yourself for that. And you've got to be able to build something in that's a little bit of a reward, and that you're going to continue to use that. Because positive self-talk is a habit that we develop. So, I just look at it when I use that specific mantra, it's like, okay, you've provided, to link back to something else we've talked about. When I repeat that to myself, I'm providing a little bit of a gap between how I respond to my son's actions.
Got it.
And how am I going to discipline them?
And if a listener wanted to try that, and let's take a look at me. So it says, take 3 qualities of your best qualities and write a script that'll you could repeat to yourself. So if I'm thinking about doing it for myself right here on air, I make a list of 3 or 4 of my best qualities, and then you can then sculpt it into a message. Yeah,
you're just going to typically then put those into what you are. So like that, to tease one out, let's say one of your best qualities is that you're a competitor. One of your best qualities is that you're confident, okay, and that you play in the present. Well, going to take that, and the interesting thing is that you kind of want to turn that into a you statement, because you're talking to you. You're not talking to I.
Okay, can I make it a little more
ahead.
Practical? I jotted a few down, even though it's hard to kind of list our best qualities. I've been very open about some of my weaknesses. So I'll give you 3 or 4, and you kind of tell me where we go. I wrote down energy. I wrote down problem solver, creative, communicator, and listener. So anything on there worth a mantra?
Okay, so we got energy, problem solver,
creative, communicator, and sometimes listener.
Okay. So you turn that into then you statements. You bring energy to every problem that you're going to creatively solve, and that you communicate and listen with that energy in every situation that you encounter. Wow. So you've taken all of those, you put them together. Now, here's the deal. I mean, you talk about habits. So let's say you put that into your beginning of the day routine. Take and put it on a little Post-it note. You got it up on your mirror, and there's your reminder every single day that you take and you use. This is a very old school thing, to go off on a little bit of a different topic, but James Lohr was one of the guys that was kind of original mental toughness writer. He had a competitive adjective profile. It's not like research tested or whatever, but it was about 27 terms that were kind of polar opposites. And one of those was like this. So let's talk about confidence. So unconfident, confident, unconfident on a 0, confident on a 10. You rate yourself on a 0 to 10. And so basically you get down through it, and any of the ones that you scored a 7 or higher, you consider strengths. Any of the ones that you would write like 4 or lower, you could take and they'd be weaknesses. Well, this is the mantra piece, you take those 4 or lower, those weaknesses, make the opposite, and you can talk yourself into being those. So let's say I chose unconfident. Well, then I build that confidence into a statement, and I read that to myself over those, like, say, 27 days, and I continue to build that piece to it. But if you take that mantra and it becomes something that's a core of what you are.
Wow. It sounds like you live this.
I try to. I guess I should a little bit more Yoda. I do or do not do. There is no try. For me, I talk about it. I kind of boil down to core values. 5 core values for me: to learn. I learn so that I can teach. I teach so that I can serve. And I do all 3 of those with gratitude and from the heart. Every single day I write down those core values. Just to, again, prime my mind and remind myself that that's what those core values are for me.
Every day you write them down. What's that look like?
I have a daily register sheet that I have to put my yearly word. If you're familiar with the John Gordon.
Yeah, I saw yours.
One word.
Engage.
Yeah, so I have a sheet. I write engage down at the top for my yearly word, write the core values. Then I have a spot for 3 daily goals. Don't always have 3, but daily things that I want to accomplish. And then I wrote the quote of the day, which is to give a little plug to get back to Twitter, which is the tweet that I put out each day. And then there's a portion where it's 3 things I'm grateful for, thankful for during the day. Now I fill that out the next morning. And then to build on the concept of, if many of the teachers that are out there, the concept of grit by Angela Duckworth, there was 2 questions that she says that you should ask yourself if you're going to develop passion every day is, how was I challenged today, and did I have fun today? And so I kind of fill that sheet out every single day.
If I'm a 17-year-old in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I say, Mr. Swarr, this seems like a lot of work. What do you say to that?
Well, basically, if you want to be successful, it takes work. And so hashtag hard work pays off. And so you put those things together and, you've got a goal that's out there, you can accomplish it. It doesn't mean you're going to go, if you're a baseball player, go from throwing 70 mile an hour to 90 mile an hour overnight. But we have no idea how good you can be. So let's get after it and get going. What
project are you working on now?
So basically, second book that I'm working on is going to be a storybook. So it's a little bit of a shift for me of fictional writing, but I would say a little bit more of a fable. It's the journey of two people, the journey of 2 people, how they work together, but it's a journey of a high school athlete and the journey of a coach. So the coach is a little bit more experienced than the wise sage, but it's really about how we develop a tribe. And the tribe aspect is to give a little bit more of a higher level than a team. So there's 3 levels of groups of people. You got a group. You have no choice on whether you're in a group. So freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, boy, girl. You have no choice on whether you put into those groups. You have a choice on whether you're a part of a team. You make a choice to try out. The coach might make a choice on whether you make that team or not. But then there's a 3rd level, and that's a tribe. And the tribes compete at a higher level, and they're all in. There's 5 C's that go with a tribe. First one is kind of relates core values and culture. Once you establish the core values and the culture, you have individual connection to those core values and that culture. You take conflict, turn it into closeness. So closeness being the 3rd C. 4th is courage is rewarded. And then after you do all of those, it's a little bit of a stretch, but collective leadership within that tribe. It's not just one person. It's not one group within that tribe. It's collective leadership. And so it's basically the coach going through a season and building this tribe, and it's the path and the journey of that high school athlete within that tribe.
When can we look for it?
I wish I could put a timeline on it. Basically, to come back to the 1% better in the daily process is my goal. Is if I can sit down and focus and write for about 20 to 30 minutes every day, I get about 500 words written in that day. I will tell you my goal is to have that rough draft completed by the end of January. But I guess I need to establish an accountability partner to make sure I do that. But I would say my goal is within the January, February to have that completed. So sometime by the end of the school year, then hard copy in hand.
Got it. And my hope is that bringing people like you on to the 1% Better Project, there are got to be people listening that want to work with you. Jeff, what's the best way for people to not just connect at Mr._Swarr, but how would you really like to work with people who are listening?
So there's a couple ways. I would direct a lot of people to my website. Again, that's Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Swarr, SWARR.com. On the left-hand side of that website, you can sign up for a weekly email that I send out. and it gets you into like a first notification of books and information that come from me there. You can see some examples of previous weekly emails on my website as the blog and some video posts that are there. I've also recently really tried to begin putting some things on my YouTube channel, which you can get off the website as well. But so I kind of do some things on a weekly basis through both of those channels as well. Mm-hmm. And I can, you reference some people there. Email as well. Feel free to reach out. I'm not real creative. I will tell you that. My email address is Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at jeffreyswarr.com. So, I try and keep things pretty consistent there as well. And I will tell you this, that I will respond to you if you email me, but to honor the gap, it might take about 24 to 48 hours until that happens.
We respect it. Who's the ideal person, though, or team that's looking to work with you? Because there's people right now saying, I like this guy. And I'm wondering, who is your ideal client or team?
Well, okay, so let's go to individuals first. So basically individuals that I want to be able to work with, and then I'd say we would want to work together, is somebody that has a desire to perform at a higher level than they currently are. One thing we haven't even touched on, that would be a whole nother piece, is the 10 commandments of a competitor are the core concepts of what I teach when I go with a team and an individual. When we go to teams, we talk about the tribe. So if you're a team out there and you're saying, hey, we want to work together as a team, well, the tribe is another level for you to take it to. And so you could reach out and we could set some things up. Don't let proximity dictate what goes on. Because I come in, I can do a session with the team, and then I do a lot of follow-up videos with that, specific videos, having worked with the coach to address things that are going on within the tribe right then and there. So you got the team aspect, where teams that want to take it to another level and compete as a tribe. You got the individuals that are saying, hey, what can we do to perform at a higher level and reach our potential?
This morning I heard a concept, the mercenary versus the missionary. The missionary works for something greater, a cause. The mercenary is doing it for money. You seem to me a lifelong learner, working for a mission, and you seem very confident, Jeff. So I got to believe people listening today got that same impression.
Well, I appreciate you using the word confident, because I will tell you this. I have always, in the past, leading up to kind of taking on this project, have really looked outside for confidence in what like people would tell me, meaning like, okay, so other people saying, hey, you've done a great job on that. And really, confidence has got to come from within. And that's kind of comes back to full circle. And what we talked about here is, that still the humble nature, not like this boastful nature, but that confidence has really got to come from within. So I've tried hard to establish that, because it hasn't always been there.
Jeff, a sincere thank you for taking the time and investing the energy that is required to kind of get on here and kind of just share so much of yourself. So a sincere thanks from me and everybody at the 1% Better Project.
Well, Joe, I appreciate it. I mean, the fact that you reached out and we were able to connect, and I use that word a lot. You just used it there, connect. I think that's what it's about. It's our connection with any individual that we come in contact with, and that's, quite frankly, my mission is to connect with them and help them achieve their goals.
1% better a day. It's not nearly as daunting when you say it like that. Jeff seems to be living it. We thank Jeffrey Swarr for joining us. Go ahead and find his work. 369 Days, A Competitor's Heart. Tremendous, tremendous read. Thanks again, Jeff, for being with us.
Joe, I appreciate the opportunity to share and look forward to connect with anyone out there that I can help and I can serve them to reach their goals.